Okay, so the next concept that we are going to talk about is the concept of ore, or an ore body. What is an ore body? So in the geological and mining sense, this is a mineral deposit or mineral concentration from which a metal or a non-metal compound can be economically extracted at the present time. So we only talk about ore to refer to something that we can extract at the present time in terms of whether it's economic or we have the technology to extract that. So that constitutes ore, and this is also a very important term in terms of understanding the critical minerals. Now that we have spoken about minerals, I want to move on to critical minerals, and probably that's going to answer some of your questions in terms of why are we leaving out certain minerals which we think they are important, or certain materials which we think they are important. And you are going to see that from the definition of critical minerals or critical elements. A critical element is defined as the valuable constituent element of a mineral commodity that is subject to risk of supply disruption and which serves a purpose deemed as important based on the evaluator's perspective. So as you can see, it's very, very subjective. That's point number one. Point number two, critical minerals are defined in terms of the level of risk that is there of disruption in the supply chain. So if we have something that is important and there is no risk of disruption in terms of supply, it ceases to be a critical mineral. So the issue of criticality is closely linked to the resilience of a supply chain, or to the extent to which the supply chain is springs back in the event of a disruption. That's what we call resilience in supply chain. We are looking at if there's a disruption, how quick do we come back to the original state or even a better state. And the other important aspect is also the fact that it has to be very, very important. So the key distinction, some people have often asked to say, what's the difference between a critical minerals and a strategic mineral? Okay, so strategy is derived from a Greek word strategos, which means general of the army, actually. So strategic minerals are defined in terms of how important they are, especially from the perspective of the army, from issues of security. And the issue of critical minerals was also borrowed from that strategy, because around the First World War and Second World War, because of these disruptions, they had severe impacts in terms of how countries were able to execute the war. So there is a close relationship between strategic minerals and critical minerals. But the issue of strategy is to do with outwitting competitors. So you are using those minerals to beat your competition, but criticality speaks to the risk that we have in terms of the disruption of that particular supply chain. So those are very, very important definitions. And now to look at the evolution of critical, the concept of critical minerals. You can see that it started around the period of World War I, or just before the First World War, where countries were eager or keen to have these minerals so that they can be able to develop military strength and sovereignty to defend their countries, or to be on the offensive so as to capture colonies. You know, the First World War essentially was sparked by the need to grab colonies. This is where some countries were colonized and all that, for those that know history. So that was the initial introduction of that concept, but it was to do with, especially in the army. And from there, in 1939, that's where the definition was formalized through an act in the United States of America that looked specifically at the issue of critical materials, and that act was enacted in 1939. And further in the 1980s, the concept further developed, but in this case, it was also now looking at the issue of technological equipment. So from just a perspective of the military to look at other technologies around 1980 and thereabout because of the digital explosion. But now from the 2000 going forward, you realize that the issue of criticality is now closely linked to Industry 5.0 and Society 5.0. Society 5.0 and Industry 5.0 looks at the issue of putting people at the center of technological development and advancement. So now we are talking of critical minerals from the concept of wanting to make sure that we preserve the environment, for example. We are looking at issues of sustainability. So criticality at the present moment is now broader than initially where it was looking at just to bring security to the country. So in addition to issues like security, we are also looking beyond security to look at global warming and all that. But what are some of the key attributes of critical minerals that make us say this mineral is critical? Typically, these are geologically dispersed. They are not necessarily found in abundance. And when you look at the concentration in terms of geography, they are concentrated in specific and limited locations. And most of these locations, when you look at that map, they are in developing countries. So when you look at countries like Brazil, China, and of course South Africa in terms of platinum, as we saw from the previous speakers, this is important in terms of the consequences or the implications in terms of sustainability in those communities where they are mined, because they are mined in developing countries. There are fears that the demand for critical minerals is going to trigger human rights abuses and environmental degradation, because, like I said, the institutions are already compromised. So it's very, very important to look at where do they come from. So the issue of risk now is linked to the fact that they come from specific areas, and most of these areas are volatile when it comes to the politics around those areas. Look at cobalt. The bulk of our cobalt is deposited in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the situation in the Congo is very, very dicey and tricky. So anytime we may have no more cobalt coming to the world, that makes it a critical mineral because it's highly risky. Look at platinum. Most of it is concentrated on what they call the lithium triangle in South America, where Bolivia, Argentina are the country, and Chile are the three major countries that supply lithium in South America. And in Africa also we have what we call the African lithium triangle, where the DRC, Zimbabwe, and Namibia are the three major producers of lithium, where much of the lithium is deposited. But when you look at these countries, supply is not guaranteed because of other issues. So that makes it very, very risky. But these also can be, as an attribute, they can also be recovered as a byproduct of other minerals or other mineral or other commodity exploitation. This brings us to the issue of the need for valorization, where we had we mined gold and we have gold waste. We can then go back and do what we call valorization, or to try and reignite value from that waste as a way of also dealing with the issue of environmental degradation, but also to recover these critical minerals from those waste. Okay, then so countries have been running to come up with lists of what they call critical minerals. From our definition, you realize that critical minerals are a function of, or the perspective of, whoever is crafting that list. So different countries will have different lists. It's not all the minerals that are critical to all the countries. Countries will have a diverse range of what they call critical minerals, and this is this is Canada's list of critical minerals that was generated in 2019, and these are not static. Also, they keep updating them to add more minerals that they think they are at risk of supply chain disruptions. China, they also have their own list. The European Union, they have a combined list. Australia, they have a combined list. But in the developing countries, as we see South Africa and other developing countries, we haven't been able to generate comprehensive lists of what we think are critical minerals. This is why we are not able to manage the supply of those minerals for our advantage as emerging countries. So developing countries and other countries such as China are already actively coming up with their lists. But like I said, these lists are not objective. They are different depending on what a country is looking at. Just to demonstrate why this is important, when you look at that graph, it shows China's critical mineral security from around 2020, 2021 to 2015. At the beginning, you can see that most of the minerals were actually insecure. They didn't have much of the materials. As you can see from zero, they were in the negative for a number of minerals, including lead, your zinc there, and aluminium. They were on the negative, but over time, as they developed, because they already knew that we need to have these minerals, and in the future they may run out or they may not be available. So they deliberately moved from the negative to the positive, and this speaks to why it's very, very important for countries to look at that, and for the media, it's very important to track such developments to see what's going on in different jurisdictions and all that. So how can we mitigate the risk? Or some of the strategies for mitigating this risk would include improved processing technology and systems so as to deal with these issues of disruption. For instance, one of the key challenges with lithium mining and processing is the issue of water. It's very, very water intensive. As a result, in those areas where we have lithium production, there are always issues with communities when it comes to fighting for water and all that. Studies from the lithium triangle in Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina show that communities ended up blocking lithium operations because their bores could not have water now because they drain water underground because of those processes. So we are calling for research, for example, to look at how can we have processes that do not consume a lot of water, that do not waste a lot of water, so that the relationship between communities and their livelihoods are not compromised. And diversity or diversifying supply chains is also a very, very important strategy, as we shall see, to say countries are looking at who are the suppliers of our resources. How can we diversify not only the source but also the processing of those plants, because it's important to look at the supply chain disruption, not necessarily just at the source, but the entire supply chain. So next we are going to look at what the value chain looks like, because to be able to deal with this risk, we need to appreciate what the value chain looks like. So it starts with geoscience and exploration, so that's where the value chain starts in terms of exploration. The geoscience is around those minerals. So already that becomes an interesting area when it comes to media and reporting. As soon as people move in to do the exploration, you are already observing and reporting in terms of, are there human rights violations, if that is the area that you're interested in, but what also are the prospects and all that. You're already reporting on that. It's a very important area. And mineral extraction is the next level where you then do the mineral extraction. This is where a lot of environmental impacts occur during that period. And there's also displacement sometimes of communities, and you need to track that and to look at how is this impacting communities. For example, if we look at the example of the Rio Tinto and Chinese investors operating, working on operating in Guinea, what they call the Senadua project, they are going to they, in fact, they have already moved quite a significant number of people that have been moved, because they are opening a railway line more than 600 kilometers of railway line. And this has resulted in people being moved and relocated, resettled, and all that. So there's also going to be those issues. And then we also have the midstream, where we have the intermediate processing, where we remove much of the waste from those minerals. And then we have advanced manufacturing. Then we have downstream, which is the assembly and use products and all that. So the criticality depends on all those areas to say, where is the processing taking place? If processing, for instance, of a particular mineral is concentrated in one country, that becomes very, very risky in terms of supply disruption. I think we saw that during because following the war in Ukraine and Russia, to say some of the resources that we typically got from Russia are no longer available, or some of the resources that were moving from the West to Russia or Russia to the West, they are no longer in a position to do that. So that's a disruption, and it's very, very important for us to have several nodes in terms of the sourcing, but also in terms of the manufacturing and the processing. Much of these critical minerals are processed in China, of course, because of China, the labor costs are very, very low compared to the West. So the West, even there are organizations, things like the iPhone and all these other companies, they would rather go and manufacture in China. But now, because of critical minerals, that has given China an advantage, because already they are ahead, they have the infrastructure and all that. The West, because they didn't want to pollute their environment, also thought maybe let's just do the assembly and not do much of the processing, because it will degrade the environment and all that. So those are some of the dynamics that we are tracking to see what's going on. Okay, sorry. Thank you very much. So those are we spoke about those the triangles. That's the lithium map to show in Africa the concentration as well as in Latin America. And I'll be sharing with you. This is how countries are now moving in to try and solidify their standing. This is the situation in Canada, where they are now trying to build their own capacity by high investments in their country in terms of processing of these critical minerals and further developing them. But they are also doing some international integration with other international companies to attract them to come and invest in their countries, so that they consolidate their influence. And then the issue of recycling is also very important when it comes to critical minerals, and that's a model of or the flow process of the recycling of vehicle or automobile catalytic converters, and those are the processes that they go through, where they look at collection, decanning, crushing, but then leaching, filtering, and precipitation, then further filtering, refining, and back they start afresh to also do those catalysts or to do some electronic equipments and all that. So recycling is very, very important. However, what we find in research is that recycling is not going to be enough to cover the energy transition alone. So we need it, but very small quantities, especially right here at the beginning. We are going to need a lot of mining. So mining is here to stay. So ultimately, as we move towards the conclusion, we are saying energy transition is a phased and gradual socio-economic shift. So when you talk about energy transition, we are not only talking about changes in the use of energy, to say we're using coal energy, now we are using probably solar energy, but we are also looking at social transitions that occur. We are looking at behavioral changes in the use of energy. For instance, if you move from coal to solar, but your behavior has not changed, you still keep your lights on even when you are not in those rooms. So we need to also speak about behavioral change, and this is where the media should come in, because for renewable energy to gain momentum, we need that critical mass of people that are going to be using and utilizing that, and the media is very, very important in terms of communicating those behavioral change. And the pen is powerful. People, when they see something that is written, they are more likely to listen. So as we conclude, we find that energy transitions are important. Critical minerals are important for security, but they're also important for energy in the face of global warming, to reverse the global warming, but also for technological advancement. And this takes me to what Albert said when he said, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. So as the media and as journalists, it's about what we do when we watch those that destroy the world, destroy it in terms of environmental pollution, in terms of all these other disruptions that we see in the value chain. So this takes us to the end of this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. I'm aware you're in a bit of a rush to leave. Would you have time for a couple of questions?
Yes,
are there any questions in the audience? I thought I saw one from Clarity earlier. We missed you. So while the mic's going to you, just if there is anyone online who wants to ask questions, raise your hands as well. But maybe we'll take 3 at a time first in the room. So first, Clarity, and then yourself, and yourself.
Thank you so much, Doc, for the insightful presentation. My first question is on stockpiling. I see you had one bullet, but you didn't delve deeper into the issue. What do you think about the issue of stockpiling the critical minerals? And another question is on the acquisition of the social license to operate, because more often than not, we have realized that it's a zero-sum game, some gain and some lose. So how can investors sustain the interest of communities and their interests as well? Thanks.
Thanks very much. Should we just get all of those questions first, and then you can try and answer them together?
Thank you so much for the insightful session. My question is in regards to the environmental impacts of especially the extraction part of mining, where mining companies do not consult with the communities. In case of Zimbabwe, there have been so many issues where they wake up, especially with Chinese companies, they wake up and already there's machinery, and when they are done extraction, they leave open, I don't know what they call them, but open spaces, and not taking accountability of this environmental and health impact. So, I mean, in your experience and research, where do you see these mining companies taking accountability of the environmental impacts that they leave in communities? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc. So my name is Frank from Zimbabwe. And we are coming from green governance, also trying to advocate for a just energy transition. And, much of the questions that come back to us is civil society, is the potential for the energy transition itself to sustain economies. I think Gerald also made mention to that, to say the local value addition is one critical aspect of this story, to say, there's been siphoning of all these resources from Zimbabwe, DRC and others, without any serious attempt to value add them. But I don't know, from your perspective, what then should be done to ensure that there's actually some steps towards value addition of these products? Because obviously, if you've got lithium in Zimbabwe or cobalt in DRC, it's not only the only component that is needed to ensure that we've got an EV battery or a solar panel or a wind tunnel. There are other things that need. How then can we ensure that economies and countries understand and take advantage of at least what's there, so that we are able to produce these components that are used to power industries and cars and so forth? I'm asking this because there's no technology transfer though, which we are seeing at the moment. And to push for community beneficiation from only the exploration of resources might not be adequate. Maybe we can only see the actual benefit of these minerals by the countries if we've got a final product, then we're able to export it or maybe use it in other ways. What's your view on that aspect? Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. So I was at the inaugural Critical Minerals Summit, which was held in Sandton. And one of the things that came out was around policy for critical minerals and the fact that African countries do not have any existing policies around critical minerals. I know that South Africa is currently developing one, but then looking at and from the presentations that have been made, that the non-existence of policy is one of the things that leads to things where communities are exploited, mining companies are not held accountable, and also what Diana just said about mines just coming in, extracting and leaving the environmental damage with the communities. In your research, what have you looked at in terms of the need for policies, but also in the existing policies, is there any kind of accountability mechanisms that are in place where communities are not left trying to restore what has been damaged by the mining communities, the mining companies?
Okay. Thanks very much. I think we can try to have a conversation around those questions. The first question was looking at, or the first two questions looked at the issue of stockpiling and social license to operate. Although stockpiling has been identified as one of the strategies to make sure that we reduce that risk of supply chain disruption, because if you have adequate materials that you have, in the event of a disruption, you can keep running until that disruption maybe is overcome. So it's more of a short-term strategy, something that is not very sustainable in the long run, but it can give you that breathing space to recover in the event of a disruption. Maybe it's an earthquake or maybe whatever disturbance that occurred and the disruption has occurred. You can lean on your stockpile, but it's not sustainable. What is more sustainable is to try and diversify different nodes of the supply chain in terms of source, manufacture, and all that. And in terms of social license to operate, this one is it's a very important one. However, it takes a level of maturity from the companies themselves as well as the entire supply chain, by the way, to be really responsible for their actions and activities. But I think the media also will play a key role in terms of conscientizing these communities, because this has to go back to the communities at the end of the day that are affected by these processes and that live within the proximity of these mining operations. They are the most affected, but when you look at the benefits, they are the least to get the benefits, and it's up to the communities to also participate with the help of course, civil society organizations to conscientize, build capacity for them to be able to speak for themselves, which is which is more sustainable. And then the other issue was also related, the issue of environmental impact and all that. It's also related. You realize that even where policies are crafted, sometimes there is no consultation. So it's not only the mining companies that do not consult when they are coming to do exploration and all that, but the government is also not consulting people when it comes to crafting of policies. Sometimes a policy is developed, and when then go back, people say, we're never consulted. And if we don't consult the people, then it becomes a problem. So now the saying is, nothing for us without us. So let's make sure that we are always involving the people, collaborating with them in every respect. Then there was a question on steps towards value addition. Yeah, the several challenges there that we have. One of them is the issue of corruption. Corruption is a cancer that we can never overemphasize, because the issue of corruption makes it very difficult for people to make decisions that will benefit the broader society, but rather for self-interest, and that becomes a serious challenge. There is no way we can talk of things like value addition without mentioning the issue of genuine political will from the leadership, in terms of, do we genuinely want to make sure that people benefit from these resources? And if we have that political will, I'm sure it's a great starting point. Then the issue of technology also, we may need to value add, but we lack the technology. So it's about entering into partnerships, for instance, with if we look at China, for instance, they do have a well-advanced technological base. Us as the Wits Mining Institute, we are already in partnership with some of China's universities, because we see they are ahead of the curve. Of course, there are issues that they learn from us in South Africa because of the level of depth that we have gone with our mining versus theirs. They also learn from us how to deal with such situations. But we are saying collaboration amongst the emerging or the global South countries could be a great starting point. If we look at those lithium triangle, where we look at Namibia, the DRC, and Zimbabwe, they are giants in terms of lithium, but they are all working in silos, and there is no collaboration where, for instance, they do meetings of countries that produce lithium to say, what are the challenges that we face? What are the common challenges? How can, for instance, build a research institute that is going to look at critical minerals within the region, because they are within close proximity, but we are not doing that. And then the issue of policy is also linked to that. I think I addressed the issue of policy also, because in our research, what we find is that private investment is not coming mainly because of policy gaps. There are no policy gaps there. So the issue of policy has to be seriously considered and looked into. And we think that with adequate and appropriate policies, the private sector can join in to invest, because unless we take along the private sector, the energy transition cannot be funded. Government alone may not be able to fund the energy transition. So we need everyone to participate.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for those really comprehensive answers to those great questions. I'm aware you need to run off to something else, so sorry if there's other questions in the room. Yeah, let's give a big round of applause to Dr. Nelson Chipangamate.
Thank you very much.